Today's episode may one day be brought to you by DNA-based data storage. Google that. Today I'd like to talk about blasters that are ideal for young children. I'm not talking about ages 8 and up, because that's what Nerf is typically intended for. Even 6 or 7 year olds can use most blasters perfectly fine. I'm talking about ages 3 to 5. Little kids who want to play along with their siblings or with their parents, but for a variety of reasons, can't use most blasters. Before I begin, I have to stress that you should not leave children that young unsupervised with Nerf blasters unless you have taught them properly and they know exactly what they're doing. Because no matter how you design something like a blaster, it's still firing a projectile and they could still shoot themselves in the eye. And you might think that it's common sense not to point a loaded blaster right at your own eye, but a 3-year-old will gladly prove you wrong. So this is a great opportunity to teach children both safety and respect. At that age, they can't necessarily be expected to precisely follow firearm safety procedures like trigger discipline and so on, but they can understand two basic and very important rules. 1, never point the blaster at yourself, and 2, never point the blaster at anyone who is not playing with you. That may seem very simple and very basic, but it is extremely important. Safety and respect. And it teaches them that there are certain privileges they can earn, that by behaving a certain way, they can get certain benefits out of it, and they have a responsibility. And at that age, getting any sort of responsibility and getting a tangible reward for it is actually a really big deal. So before we get into a really detailed analysis of different blaster types, let's just cut straight to an easy answer. If you want to get something cheap and simple for your kids, get them a Jolt. You can't go wrong with a Jolt. They're everywhere, they're cheap, and, well, not this one. This one is super rare and it's like basically nowhere, but most Jolts are very easy to find. They're easy for the kids to prime, they're easy for the kids to load, and they are easy for the kids to carry. So those three things, primability, loadability, and ease of carry, are what make a good blaster for a young child. So something interesting that I found is that the Big Shock is actually quite good for children. Now, you might not think that a bigger, heavier blaster like this, especially with a heavier prime, would be ideal for a young child, but I found that because of the longer draw, they don't have that much of a problem with it. And the big, beefy proportions of the blaster are actually better for them because they're going to toss these things around. Regular Jolts might break. This one is less likely to because of just a sturdier overall shell. It fires the big mega darts, which are easier to find, and they also whistle as they fly, so you kind of have a general idea of where they shot them. And all of that adds up to a pretty overall solid recommendation. You can get these things for $6 or $7, and the kid will be more than happy with them. So let's start with something you should definitely avoid. Stay away from mags. And I know we use mags all the time, and they're very popular in the hobby and so on, but for little kids, they really don't make sense. They're not going to be carrying a lot of mags. They don't need high capacity. They don't need fast reloads. This is just going to be confusing for them. You've got too many points of failure here. So let's say that they load the mag with the dart in backwards. That dart is going to jam. You're going to destroy the dart, and you're going to possibly jam your blaster. Even if they load the dart forward, it's still possible that they may load it too far back, and then the back of the dart gets caught because it's not fully aligned with the follower, or too far forward, and likewise the front bends, and if the dart is too damaged, then it's going to jam. So even if they get that right, it's possible for them to accidentally insert it backwards and jam it, or insert it forward without pulling the breech back and jam it. So this is too much that can go wrong with no tangible benefits to small children. Don't bother with magazines. Now, clips might seem like an ideal solution because they don't jam the same way that magazines do. They don't have to have jam doors, and they have individual chambers that you can load in. So overall, it seems to be easier, but clips fall out quite easily, and they can have problems while cycling, and depending on the design, it can be impossible to remove the clip while it's there mid-cycle. So this is not actually an ideal solution. And plus, you have to load it in a certain way. Up here, it tells you which way the clip goes, and that may seem simple for adults, but for kids who are running around and playing and being hyper, it's quite difficult to get that right every time. So this is not as good as it seems. Belts might seem like another reasonable alternative because they are front-loading and they are pretty easy to work with, it would seem. But this is the only belt blaster that a kid can actually use. The rest of them are gigantic. So this is a Dart Zone Scorpion, but it has its own limitations. First of all, this belt is stupidly complicated to get on and off, and a kid is going to just mess that up. There's too many little places they can snag. There's just not enough room in here, and this doesn't work out when kids are running around and being hyper and just trying to cram things in however they will fit. The darts actually sit a little loose in here, so when they tilt it forward, the darts slide out a little bit, and then when they go to cycle, they jam. And finally, this up here, the barrel rotates. So whenever you're pulling the trigger, it is full auto, and this barrel is going to be spinning. If they grab it by the barrel, they're going to potentially overheat the blaster, and it will shut off to prevent overheating. It actually says so in the manual. It's going to turn off, and then you can't turn it back on for 30 seconds. So they're going to come running to you, and you're going to go running to wherever you bought it and complain to them and demand a return because it's broken. And then they're going to complain to Dart Zone or Primetime Toys, the manufacturer, and they're going to stop making innovative, cool little gimmicks like this. And this is why we can't have nice things. So just don't let your kids play with this blaster or any other belt blaster. It's more hassle than it's worth, trust me. So that basically leaves us with front loaders of various types. The simplest ones are the single shot springers, and that's what I would recommend. This one is the Dart Tag Sharp Shot. It's an older blaster. They're fairly easy to find thrifting and at garage sales and so on. And they have a light spring, never in high demand because they weren't very powerful, but that's perfect for little kids. And they're easy to load. This one is one that you can actually buy currently at retail. This is, I'm going to try and remember, the Ever After High Epic Winter Snowshot Blaster. So in addition to a ridiculously long name, it actually comes with this nice, shiny, translucent barrel shroud that allows for dart storage and kind of acts as a forward grip. I've gotten mine taken off because I think this looks cool this way, but having it on really doesn't make any difference and kids will like it. So this has a big, comfortable pullback. It's got a fairly light spring. Performance is not quite on par with other far shots, which is essentially what this is. But again, that doesn't matter for a kid. All that matters is they can prime it fairly easily. Now, this also fires Boomco darts. And Boomco darts, or Boomco straws rather, are these little plastic straws with rubber heads. They're different than regular Nerf darts. They're not foam. They do not get permanently damaged when stepped on. They don't tear. They are actually incredibly durable, and you can just crumple them up and do whatever you want with them. And once you actually put them in the blaster, they just sort of reform themselves, and it works out quite well. So you fit them in, and once they fire, look at that. It's right back to its original shape. So these are absolutely fantastic. They are a little more expensive, but you're also not going to be going through them constantly the way you do with regular Nerf darts. So if you can get a hold of some Boomco products, these are actually excellent for kids. Depending on the child, revolvers might work. They are also front loaders and they are pretty straightforward, but I would avoid break action revolvers like this Side Break Spectre, because this is a fairly complicated motion for a little kid to actually press a button and then either swing the cylinder out while holding the button or to be able to put their hand around the side because kids have little hands. So this doesn't really work out very well for them, and you want to avoid that. What you want is you want a front loader like this. This is the Chinese hammer shot, more or less. It's actually a Sweet Revenge shell. So it's got this front-loading cylinder, and it's very straightforward and very easy for them. Now, some of the younger kids may not be able to operate the hammer. Maybe they could do it two-handed, but it's not ideal, so I wouldn't recommend it unless you know for sure that your kid can use it. But this is still a good example of a nice open front-end ammo system. Another springer I can recommend, if you can find it, is the Rocket Raccoon Blaster. This is a bit pricier and a bit harder to find. It is licensed merchandise from Marvel, but it is great for little kids. The stock actually works for them. Their hands fit in the handguard, and it's a simple 4-shot Smart AR front loader with a relatively light and easy prime. So if you can get your hands on this or you find it somewhere for sale, this is actually really good for 4 and 5-year-olds. I'm not sure about 3-year-olds. It might be just a little too big for them, but 4 and 5, definitely okay. Now, you might think that battery-powered blasters are kind of a no-brainer because they don't have to prime, so you'd think that that would make it easier for the kids. But the problem is that a lot of battery-powered blasters use mags and they use rev triggers. And it's so easy for kids to jam this, because having to hold down the rev trigger and then pull the trigger and having to make sure you're doing a nice, crisp trigger pull every single time can get very frustrating very quickly when you end up with repeated jams and they keep trying to rev and possibly overheat the blaster. So this doesn't really work out very well. The Barricade sort of offers a solution by having an on-off switch so that it's permanently revving, and it also doesn't have a magazine. But the problem is that they have to still do those nice clean trigger pulls, and if they do kind of a partial pull, it's easy for that to get stuck, and then you end up having to unjam it. So this, once again, doesn't work out as well as you would think it would. So you might think, okay, let's just do full auto then. And yeah, that would be ideal, but the full auto blasters are really big. Stuff like Rapid Strikes and Hyperfires and Brutes and things like that are just way too big for little kids. However, there is one ideal solution that solves all the problems we've been talking about, and that is the PowerBell. The PowerBell and the SwarmFire, the PowerBell is actually a newer, more advanced version, so if you're going to be paying decent money for either of them, go for this one instead. This is a blaster with no on-off switch. You simply hold the trigger down and it just fires automatically. It's got a front-loading turret. The only real point of failure here is if the kids just forcibly try to turn the turret or hold it still, and that doesn't actually hurt anything. It's just going to fail to rotate. So this is just a pretty ideal solution all around. Front-loading, no on-off, no rev trigger, no anything, no way to jam. Just hold down the trigger and it just does its job. So this is a bit big for 3 to 5 year olds, but it's not overwhelming. It's not like a SwarmFire or something. So they can still use this pretty decently. And I found that a lot of younger kids actually like blasters that are just a bit too big for them. They like the idea of holding something oversized, and it kind of makes them feel like they can hang with their older siblings or with their parents. So this is pretty much ideal in terms of just big enough for them to actually carry around without getting tired. And if you need to, there's a very nice and easy lanyard mount here, and you can just give them a sling and they can help support the weight somewhat. So with the batteries in, it does weigh quite a bit, but you can easily put in a small LiPo. The LiPo is going to be much lighter, and it's not actually going to increase performance, just fire rate, because you actually need to increase the spring to increase performance. So as long as you leave the spring stock, it's not going to be hitting harder, they're not going to hurt themselves, and it's going to be lighter and more manageable. Also, the fact that you can recharge the LiPo means that even though it costs a little more initially and you're going to have to do a little modding, it's going to save you a fortune in batteries if this ends up being your kid's go-to blaster. There's another option that I had not even considered but turned out to be a huge hit with the kids, and that is small air-powered blasters. Not all of them work for this. A lot of them just give too much resistance after a pump or two, but the burst wave is actually perfect. So you can do 1, 2 pumps quite easily. Third pump is a little difficult. Fourth pump is a bit more difficult, and that's about where the OPRV kicks in. But even with 1 or 2 pumps, that's still a decent amount of power, and those darts will still go flying far enough to make the kids happy. It's a simple front loader. It uses the durable Boomco darts, and it's, again, really simple, can't jam, and impossible to really screw up. So I really do recommend the Burst Wave. You can get them for like, I think $15 or so. They might have gone up in price recently because I believe they're discontinued. But if you can find these on eBay or in garage sales or something, snap them up. These are good little blasters. The last one I want to go over is something that's actually better than a Jolt in every single way. It is the vastly underappreciated Boomco Grip Strike. So this is a very simple prime that's similar to a bellows. You just kind of squeeze and it shoots the dart out. It really can't break. There's nothing to break on here. There's no actual moving parts. Just that's it. So even if the kids step on it all the time, it's meant to be squeezed. So you're not going to break it very easily. And you can just like fling this thing out of windows. You can leave it outside in the rain. You can do pretty much anything except run it over with a car and it'll be fine. So those are my recommendations. It's by no means an exhaustive list, but that's what I found in my experience to work really well. If these don't really work for you, if you can't get a hold of them, you can try a wide variety of blasters. I recommend trying licensed stuff like the Star Wars blasters and so on, because those are actually recommended for ages 6 and up rather than 8 and up. They tend to have lighter primes. They tend to be a little more manageable. And your kid might actually handle magazines just fine, or they might find that hammer primes are easy for them, or whatever the case may be. So just have them try different things and see what they enjoy. At the end of the day, all you have to do is remember the 2 basic rules. Never point a blaster at yourself, never point a blaster at anyone who's not playing with you, and make sure that the blaster is primable, loadable, and easy to carry. Sooner or later, you'll find something that works for your kid, and hopefully that becomes the foundation for years of nerfing to come.